Well, ladies and gentlemen, let us start this second part of our program. And let me introduce myself. My name is Strömholm, Stig Strömholm. I'm former Vice Chancellor of Uppsala University. And I have been asked to act as moderator of that part of today's program, which deals with politics and poetics, or more precisely, with power and its symbols, or even more precisely, with the question of how to find the adequate symbolic expressions of power. And I very gladly accepted that function of moderator, the more so since it would seem to imply on this occasion, with speakers of such eminent quality, rather a peaceful and a passive role. Now, peaceful I will be, but let me only raise, to start with, by way of introduction, 2 points, which I hope will be dealt with in one way or another, either by Professor Gloria Kaiser and Messrs. Daho Harris and Sirlean in the course of their presentations, or by them in the course of the discussion, or possibly by other discussions in the exchange of views, which I hope will follow. Now, a first inevitable point would seem to be what kind of power the initiators and organizers of this seminar have chosen to refer to in their quest for a symbol. Strictly intellectual and cultural power, or a broader concept, including economic and political power. I need not add that in the case of Queen Christina, it's obvious that both these areas are concerned. In fact, they are closely intertwined, with a strong accent, a stronger accent on the political aspects in the early years, a stronger and more exclusive emphasis on the cultural elements towards the end of her life. And what applies to Queen Christina also applies to Princess Europe. Now, a second, equally inevitable question is what useful or at least reasonable function symbols can assume in the secularized and heterogeneous Europe of today, considering, as an example, the highly variegated use of symbols in the ochlocratic chaos surrounding the European football championship contests that currently infest the media, European media. It seems important to find one or more reasonably well-defined answers to that question. Is it really worth trying to find answers which are acceptable with regard to all parts of our continent and to all the generations presently living there? I beg leave to insist more particularly on the generation problem, which may well be more important than that of national or religious or economic and political differences. Sometimes, I must admit, when reading literary articles in the most advanced style by young Western intellectuals, not to speak about modern musical productions, I feel that a European university man of 80 years is likely to have more in common with a Bulgarian peasant or a Portuguese fisherman of his own generation than with these young authors whose lucubrations I'm trying to penetrate. Now, this feeling obviously gives rise to very thorny questions, but we will know very much more about that in an hour and a half or so. Now, I would like to suggest that I give the floor to our the speakers in the order of Madame Kaiser, Monsieur Parot, no, it's English, je regrette, le français serait peut-être plus naturel, mais on y va maintenant. Monsieur Parot, Harris and Monsieur Sirlean, in that order. So please, Professor Kaiser, the floor is yours. And I will sit here to keep an eye on you, and yes, because I'm old, I have to sit.
So, thank you very much. Yes, a couple of words, for sure, in general, about Christina and the politics and about Europe. The development of the human being is always the same. The me wants to withdraw, and the me is urged to develop itself in seclusion. And at the same time, our me is always looking for a community. And in this area of tension, we have to live. So we see seclusion and connection, retreat and community. we see that the wish, the strive for connection, for unite with another is indestructible. Europe, Nietzsche called it the small peninsula of Asia, we know, and that is the historical development of the European idea is at least as old as our era. We know the Roman Empire with the Latin language and Latin culture was the first attempt to unite the nations of Europe. The Roman Empire collapsed. The wish for unity, for unification of the nations remained. And centuries came in which almost each nation of Europe attempted to gain control of a united Europe. Always they strived for control by military power, and for that reason there were always wars. Not until the past century, in 1948, with the European movement for the promotion of the European idea with the goal of the United States of Europe.
Excuse me interrupting.
Yes.
Do you hear? Everybody hears.
Is this, yes?
All right, then go on.
Was their success after 2 world wars in placing the idea of European unity of a new foundation, unity on the basis of an intellectual and cultural principle. For only, as we know, the kind of thinking should be decisive to live and think as citizen of Europe in case of, or in the sense of Erasmus of Rotterdam. And this means recognition of national individuality and subordination of government, customs, and the administration of justice to only one single goal, for peace. So, how could we find all these qualities in one single person? And I think we find all these qualities in Christina of Sweden. Because Europe is thrown back and forth and throws is back and forth itself, but it is one continent and it is one Europe. And the many languages, the many cultures have one thing in common, and this is the shared continent of Europe. And now I will come very short. Queen Christina of Sweden, the European or a European, she had command of the European languages, we heard this, and as a result, she constantly wandered in several European cultures. She was tied to the European nations through her travels, through correspondence, through individual people. For example, Sweden, she was born, Germany, Netherlands, France, this is clear, Austria, Italy, Poland. Especially we Austrians have to think and to recognize Johann Sobieski in 1668. He followed the abdication of King Johann Casimir Vasa of Poland, and then he offered the Polish crown to Christina of Sweden, and Christina declines, but then she came in contact with the Lusitanian culture, with Portugal, through the Jesuits, Antonio Vieira, and also to Spain. And all these cultures, Christina lived. So the question, do we know Christina, the politician, the lover, the philosopher? For sure, we don't know Christina well enough. At some time, the historical figure Christina, I think she was put to silence. Nonetheless, if we concern ourselves with her, we become acquainted with a fascinating human being, Christina the politician, who was constantly a peacemaker. Christina the lover, she knew the storms of passion into which a human being can be cast. And Christina the philosopher, we think on René Descartes, and also of Antonio Vieira and the smile, for example, of Democritus, these wonderful texts. And is Christina modern or is she relevant? Of course, Christina lived as a European, and she is modern because she's timeless. So her power as a symbol, as an emblem for Europe. She was not an imitator. She didn't react to trends. She went her own free way and translated masculine and feminine traits into her own language of life. And with that, she also became an unmistakable expression of her time, of the 17th century. So I only can repeat, Christina lived like a phoenix, her favorite mythical animal. And the phoenix, which in perpetual rejuvenation rises out of the ashes again and again, the spiritual power of the person Christina Vasa is still far from exhausted. She continues to have impact up into our day, and a phoenix that shakes its purple gold plumage and wings its way into the air, rejuvenated, to seek the abducted and wonderful Europe. And also one sentence, what I find during my research confirmed time and again, the surest measure for each force is the resistance which it surmounts. And I think this is proof, the whole life of Christina is proof for this strength what she had. This is my first speech.
Thank you, thank you. You obviously are for Christina.
Yes, for sure.
European symbol.
Of course,
well,
of course.
To simplify the thing, I remember an anecdote from the end of the First World War, when the situation was extremely confused in Russia. There was a British expeditionary force in northern Russia. And they found a situation of such confusion that before, when they met a troop, they could be white Russians, they could be red Russians, they could be anything really. So the commander, the British commander ordered his troops to put the question, whenever they met armed people in the forest, are you for or against the King of England? And the answer would determine their course of action. Now, you are obviously for Queen Christina,
yes,
as a European symbol, to simplify radically. Very good. Thank you indeed, Professor Kaiser. And then are there any questions or sort of simple knowledge-oriented kind, or more philosophical one I think can come later? Any questions? No. If so, I ask Professor Darroux-Harris to go on with his presentation, please.
Thank you very much. I will try to bring the point of view of a semiotician. Don't be afraid. I will try to avoid any technical term and remain, I hope, clear for everybody here. I want, if you allow me to speak
you don't hear?
Along 15 minutes.
Exactly, that's a question I put. Please be a little closer to the mouth.
Closer, yeah.
Yes.
Yes.
Put it nearer to your mouth.
Yes, I want to develop 3 points. The first point, a few semiotic comments about relations between politics and symbolics. You hear me? Yeah. You know how symbolics is essential to the political power to obtain the recognition of the politic power. I think that the term legitimization is not correct.
Legitimization you can use, yes.
Yeah.
It's not beautiful, but it can be used.
I prefer recognition. It's easier for me to pronounce. Okay, the second point is the critical and quick stock-taking of the European symbols and their obvious inadequacy today. And the third, the main point, is the examination, semiotic examination of the great figure of the Queen Christina and its possible conformity, agreement with the requirements describing a main symbol of the European cultural unity. And I want here to thank Jan Gerlo because of the lecture of his book. I was a little angry with Christina because of the premature death of René Descartes. I'm living in the town of Tours. We have 3 great figures. François Rabelais. Christina is not responsible of the death of François Rabelais. Honoré de Balzac, who died because of the use excessive of coffee. And René Descartes, just 1 year in Stockholm, when he was the tutor of the Queen Christina. I was a little angry, and I changed completely my mind after having read the book of Jan Kerlo. Thank you for you. Okay, I begin by first point. From a semiotic point of view, the first question for me is the one of the federation. The union of two individual agents. In the semiotic word is not agents but actants, but it's not important. The union in a collective agent to share beliefs, values, and support common actions. I think the first question is the one of federation, of constitution of a collective agent. Of a collective agent in the cultural dimension. And I think it's very courageous today to have a reflection in the cultural dimension when we are waiting for the result of the election in Greece. And there is the dimension very important today, economic, financial, but I think it's my thesis that the solution is cultural and not financial nor economic to resolve the problem of European federation. So if you want to collect peoples in a collective agent, it's important that the distinctive particularities of the agents, of the individual agents, are suspended in order to give the first place to the common shared intersection. And I want to give you a concrete example of the constitution of a collective agent. Perhaps you know the architecture of the Opera House of Paris, built by Garnier. To reach the huge hall of the opera, everybody must use the long and monumental stairs, which appears as a plan of corporal federation to aggregate individual persons into the collective agent of the public, which is necessary to create the space of performance. It's a very concrete example to constitute a collective agent. And I know it's very difficult to build a huge stair where peoples, European peoples, use and succeed to constitute a collective agent. I want to give you a quotation out of a very good book of François Forêt, a Belgian. The title is in French, Légitimer l'Europe, pouvoir et symbolique à l'ère de la gouvernance. We are in the subject of today. And it's my unskillful translation, excuse me. He writes, in any case, if you don't want to go out of the democratic theory, the condition of the recognition is the consent of the population joining freely a power which is not based on coercion as first means. Politic symbolics constitutes a main medium of that recognition. Belongs to politic symbolics everything or system of things overloaded with significations, operating in the double novel, it's very important, in the double novel, cognitive and affective, as reactivation of cultural codes of behaviors. I think it's a very, very good quotation to clear our problem today. If coercion creates the pragmatic dimension, the dimension of strength, the pure relationship of power struggles, the symbolic dimension, joins cognitive and affective. And here comes for me the second question, the one of the irreplaceable strength of symbolics to obtain that federation, that collective actant, since the strength of coercion is not sufficient and refused by the choice in Europe of the democratic value. So the cultural dimension is really essential for us. Yes, just a comment about the power of the symbol. We must distinguish, I think, symbol, emblem, and allegory. And I think that the term of allegory is not correct to have a discussion about Christina as main cultural symbol in Europe, because allegory, it's often the human representation of an abstract idea. Allegory of justice, allegory of vanity, and I think we cannot use the term of allegory in the case of the choice, the eventual choice of Christina as the main cultural symbol for European culture. The power of symbol, it's an other quotation of the book of François Forêt. Symbol is by nature polysemic and not monosemic. Not one signification, but several significations together in the symbol. And the symbol allowing personal and plural interpretations. It is a way to realize union even when agreement don't exist. It's very important. Even when agreement don't exist, the symbol allows to realize union. It constitutes for the power a mainstay, a tool for making see and shape the unity of the group. And I want to add that the symbol is not only means of domination, but also of dispute against the establishment. You have in your mind, I think, the example of the American flag. And the American flag burnt or even washed by some people. The flag is a symbol which is a means of dispute also. It's very important to say that. The second point, very quickly, I want to say that we have, from a semiotic point of view, three categories of political symbols. First, the behaviors, the rites, ceremonies, coded, juridically coded, and also the daily gestures with political signification. Public spiritedness, civics, consumption of media, and commensality. It's a first kind of political symbols. Second category, the linguistic facts, all the oral and written discourses. And the third, the objects, monumental architecture, statuary, and more modest things, flags, clothes, uniforms, iconography, currency. And I think in the dimension of political symbols, nothing is rigid nor definite, but everything is not possible. It's a paradox. And the cultural material constrains strategies and actors. And there is a tension between the lack of rigidity, but everything is not possible in that symbolic dimension. The symbolic production is not a sector-based politic among others, or a technical question devoted to specialists of communication. The symbolic production has to do with the foundations of the popular consent and to the theoretical and concrete modalities of the life together and of the definition of the we, the pronoun we. Well, I see that the European Union hesitates between two solutions. First, about the cultural union of the European peoples. Two solutions. The first solution, the great solution, I think Christina brings to us the great solution of the cultural union, perhaps. The quest, the search of the great founder tale. As semiotician, I like very much the term of tale, the narrative dimension of culture is the main dimension for the semioticians. And I will show in a few minutes how the tale of the life of Christina is semiotic symbols, marvelous semiotic symbols. So the quest of the great founder tale, and the second solution is compromises less ambitious and pragmatic, searching cultural solution. But we must try to impose the great founder tale, I think, to succeed in founding the cultural union in Europe. My third point is the examination, a little quick, but we may after have a discussion about that third point. Is the semiotic and not historical, the semiotic examination of the great figure of the Queen Christina and its possible conformity with the requirements describing a main symbol of the European cultural unity. Some features, semiotic features. I think her life shows an exemplary narrative trip, a canonical narrative one. The trip of the hero who breaks with the familiar space in order to conquer the unknown world as an utopic space and to conquer a new identity and a glorification. And the glorification of the hero never occurs in the familiar space, never. You must go out of the space to join a new space, an utopic space, and that utopic space for the Queen Christina is the space, the world space of Europe. It's a trip opposite to the one of the traditional tale, because the royalty, the statute obtained at the end of the traditional tale, is lived by the Queen Christina at the beginning. And her life is dominated by the presence of a total freedom and the absence of that the semiotician calls a dresser. She belongs to there is no addresser in the tale of the life of the Queen. She is as free as possible in that period. She is, I don't know if the word exists in English, incontrôlable. Incontrôlable. Nobody can control her. And she don't come back in Sweden as a queen. She comes back to Sweden, yes, but not as a queen. And I want to point also the figure, the act of conversion. I think, excuse me, that the conversion of the Queen Christina is not, for me, an act of faith, but something completely else. At the beginning, the problem of Christina, in spite of the conversation with René Descartes, the tale of Christina is completely stopped. Completely stopped. Her life is stopped. She's waiting for a husband. She does not choose. And I think that the conversion and the abdication is the mover of the tale. The tale begins, a new tale begins after a complete stop of her life, considered semiotically as a tale. It's the conversion is the mover of the tale. And it is an argument very important to consider the Queen Christina as a main symbol of culture in Europe. Okay, she leaves the country because of the transgression, and we know as semioticians that the transgression is the great mover of the tale. If you have no transgression, you have no tale possible, no tale. Well. Remember the legendary figure of Saint Martin. It is the saint of my town, and also the saint of the town of Buenos Aires. Saint Martin was the Roman legionary in the Pannony, actually Hungary. And he becomes Christian, and he is a great figure of Catholicism, of early Christianism, because of his conversion. And I think that the Queen Christina is in a very important semiotic position in the point of articulation between different words. The word of Protestantism and Catholicism, and she is protecting the poor Protestant aggressed by the dragonnade in French. She's in the position, in the articulation also with the Jewish word, with the orthodox word, and it is a position very rich from a point of view, or Semitic point of view. Well, last but not least, last comment, semiotic comment about the life and the tale of the life of Christina, the continuous travels of the Queen, cutting across the whole Europe during her life. And I try to constitute the list of the countries, but perhaps I forget one or two, but it is Sweden, Switzerland, Austria, Belgium, France, Italy, Germany, Hungary, Poland, and more, and more. So the travels allow her to appropriate by a corporal experience all the European space. It's for me very important for a European cultural symbol to have that experience corporal on the roads, difficult roads at that period in Europe, and all the dangers possible. Yes, she shows also an exceptional intellectual precocity. She has an exceptional culture and an insatiable curiosity without any limitation in the fields of arts, music, painting, sculpture, literature, sciences, theology, philosophy, mathematics, astronomy. And she conversed with Descartes, Leibniz, Spinoza, Newton, and many others. And so I think for all these reasons, for me, all these semiotic reasons, the Queen Christina could be the incarnation, because we are lacking today in Europe by a lack of embodiment, of incarnation of the politic power. In Brussels, you have no embodiment of the power. Nobody can imagine the body of the power in Brussels. Nobody, no incarnation. And it is a very important lack to constitute a true federation, a true legitimation of the politic power. So she can be the incarnation of a European cultural symbol because of the polysemy of that symbol and because of the very powerful narrative symbol of Christina, because of her position in the articulation of so many words. Thank you for it.
Thank you, Professor Darrow Harris. Thank you very much indeed. You are obviously for the Queen of Sweden, this particular respect, and on grounds which I think are most interesting, which need to be discussed. I'm grateful for your coming to in the course of your explanations precisely the function, the use of symbols, and I'm entirely of you that allegory is not the proper word here. Incidentally, before I give the floor to Professor Sörlin, I recommend strongly the audience to read the Svenska Dagbladet today. There is an excellent article on Christina in it, so you'll know very much more about her tonight than you did yesterday evening. Now, Professor Sörlin, on you go, and you must be, after all, in favor of the Queen of Sweden. Otherwise, you are a traitor and sitting in the royal palace. And would be.
Well, I just thought about that with you on my left-hand side. Is this on? So is it this is better? Okay, well, I suppose I just want to say I will have to be for her. And I think in a sense I am for her also because I think we are conducting a little bit of a thought experiment here today. We are testing the idea that maybe we could find in Christina a symbol for Europe, perhaps lacking one. And this, of course, is an issue that in this part of the world, in Sweden and the Scandinavian countries, is talked about with some more concern and perhaps curiosity than elsewhere in Europe, simply because we have such a problematic relation to Europe. And there is always a sort of an ambivalence and an oscillation between for or against, and we always seem to seek ways out of responsibility. For example, by not joining the euro, as one example. And having been involved for, it's a while ago now, in the late 80s and a good deal of the 90s in a sequence of research projects about the relationships between Scandinavia and the rest of Europe, I think I see this with even more clarity. This is perfectly true all through. And one particular expression of that may be referred to, just to remember, and that was by the former Swedish Prime Minister of Tage Erlander, who made a famous talk, or you would say infamous if you like, to one of the major trade unions sometime in the late 1950s. It was the Metals Workers Union, really one of the biggest, and he talked about Europe. Europe was on the move. There was the formation going on what was really to become subsequently the European Community and the European Union. And he asked the question, should we be there? And he was somewhat tempted, of course, because Europe represented great learning and old traditions and all of that. But there are so many dangers in Europe. It's the three C's, or K's it would be in Swedish: Catholicism, capitalism, and communism. And all evils emanated from this dangerous continent south of us. So let's stay up here and let's stay a little bit content with that. And you can use that as, I think, as a kind of, if you have a symbol here, really Tage Erlander, the kind of representative, calm, modest idea of staying close to Swedishness and carving out the political future based on that idea is quite important to remember. And we could note, for example, in the current reigning party, if I may say so, it is an alliance, but the previous party is the Conservative Moderate Party. They used to be pretty articulate on the European issues. They used to be even spearheading the discourse of the European idea and so on. Now in power, they stay much more calm on that issue. They find problems in Europe. They are doubtful. So I think we see even people are prepared to change their mind just to be not totally pro-European these days. So I think we in this part of the world, we should conduct such a thought experiment with some extra attention. I'm very grateful to the previous speaker for bringing up the idea of symbols and semiotics, because, of course, after all, it is an important thing. And we could go back to the big names in the history of anthropology, for example, or others, people who have studied nationalism. We find symbols all over the place. Raymond Firth's important work and many others, Benedict Anderson and all of them, the whole range of studies of nationalism shows the importance of national symbols, and they have played an enormous role. The same is true for Europe. And however, I think up to this point, we've had a discourse on symbols in Europe which has been quite superficial. We remember back in the 80s and early 90s, of course, there was, if you want, you can say Jacques Delors was a symbol of Europe. Maybe not so colorful as maybe Christina, but during his period and into the 90s, there was a lot of discussion about symbols. Should we have a big hymn? We will have a flag. We need more European symbols. But it stayed on a very technocratic level. It was kind of a game without fantasy, and there was no anchoring. They even needed to bring in Margot Wallström to mobilize more popular support for the idea of Europe, which of course shows the extent of the disaster. But I would like to say that here it is not just a matter, I mean, with all respect for the semiotic side of this, it is not a branding issue. It is not just, you cannot go to a consultants with public relations firm and ask them, now come up with some good symbols and let's communicate them. That's the wrong approach. So in a sense, I think Wallström's mission was very important in the sense that you need to anchor this, but you need also to bring in the political content. It's a political idea to talk about. It's a political issue, not a branding issue. And then I think, and I will come now to a number of points where I would like to argue for Christina as a good idea and a symbol for Europe. And tomorrow you can organize a new conference and I can talk against. But today we're here and I will not be a traitor. And I would like to juxtapose, to begin with, the technocratic approach, which I just described, which also I think goes very nicely, so to speak, hand in hand with another understanding of Europe, which is basically neoliberal. It's about markets, it's about freedom, it's about simple mobility. Let's build more roads and let's just to increase economic growth. It's a sort of one version of seeing this. And if you have that kind of basic idea of Europe's progress, that's just about making money flow better. Then, of course, if you were interested in a symbol, you may go for quite superficial ideas. I would like to argue that, on the other hand, we have a totally different alternative, which is more existential, cultural, deeper, anchored in the rich fabric of Europe and its past and its diversity and so on. So when you approach the whole idea of choosing symbols and bringing that up as a deeper political and almost existential issue, you should be aware of these things. To the extent also that names have been provided in previous discourses who are representative of Europe, you tend also very commonly to come up with people from continental Europe. Voltaire, for example, wow, he would be the great European. Montaigne, you'll find an Italian here or a Spaniard there, but mostly French, I think. But when do you hear of a British representative of Europe? It's sort of a contradiction in terms. And I think in the same way, the contradiction in terms of finding a people from sort of a Norwegian to represent Europe, you need to think hard to sort of internalize that animal. But that's, of course, why we should be particularly interested in Christina. Now, I think one should note about Christina I will now give a couple of characteristics of her that I think are useful here. One would be to just denote her as a hybrid person. She's a hybrid. And I think that is the epitome of modernity. Today, everything is going hybrid. Nothing is really what it seems to be. It changes all the time. She is really a representative of that fundamentally modern and contemporary idea. And I think that is also basically why we're here today. We sense this. There's a play coming up I read somewhere on the web. Maybe it's already been started, I don't know. But a young, sensitive author like Sara Stridsberg is now interested in Christina as a personality, writing a play about her, setting up on Dramaten, I heard. And then, and we also read in the various sexual cultures and communities, they trans personalities take an interest in Christina because she's just a trans figure. We don't need to buy into, and we shouldn't probably for sheer scientific reasons, into this old Esseen-Möller argument about that her being a hermaphrodite and all of that discussion. I think that's now part of the past. It wasn't true, but I think what remains from that is this fundamental ambiguity. We find here a person who who doesn't really neatly belong in any fixed camp. She doesn't wear a hat. We don't put a hat or a crown on her and she just expected to sit there. She's prepared to change her mind. And I think that's another she's prepared to live with change. Her entire life is a life in change, accepting change, grappling with change. And I think that's also quite important here. She's also creative. I think, of course, not everybody is an author. Not everybody perhaps want to become an author, but football players and everybody now seems to be an author. And she was also an author. She wrote herself. She was a creative person in her own right. I think that's quite important. It's also very important to note her broad cultural interest, not just as a phrase. She was interested in culture, spoke languages, we all know, but she also made an effort. She collected. And I think the collecting, the deliberate effort to actually put Sweden on a par with the rest of Europe by bringing here the libraries, the collection, the Rudolf II's collections, and you can discuss on what terms they arrived in Sweden and why and so on, and certainly, but they arrived. She was in charge. She wanted them to be here. She wanted to lift the nation. In a certain sense, you could also, and now I represent Folkuniversitetet, as you know, turn her into sort of an arch saint of folkbildning, to bring the level up on the way avant le mot, so to speak. But so we find all these traits in her. To bring up that first little word that was mentioned by Stig Strömholm about secularization, to talk about our time as more secularized. Well, we used to think that way. I don't think we do that anymore. Religion is here. It's persistent. It's even come back with a Renaissance quality, so to speak, and a strength that is sometimes very even frightening, but it is here. And you need to live with that as well. And certainly she did live with religion. You can discuss to what extent, as the previous speaker did, she was really a believing person. There might have been other dimensions that came even up as more important to her. But she was, in that sense, a real politician in the sense that she also needed to live with religion, live with change, and embody change, which I think again points to something which is also a heritage from this time that still is very much part of European identity and should remain so, which is the ambiguity and the doubt that the Cartesian doubt. What did she pick up in these few months with this man? Well, not much perhaps, but I think she was clever enough to pick up that the very basic ideas, and that you needed to go into yourself and take your decisions and be responsible for your decisions, doubting. I think that's very important as well, and sort of brings another facet to the hybrid personality. And then one thing that is still very difficult is this issue with women and science. The propagators of science, all the ministers and so on and so forth, they all, we want more women in science, that we should have more school children. She already in the 17th century was herself a woman, accepting, acknowledging science, wanting science to be brought here. And the kind of personalities she brought represented a wide range of scholarly and scientific specialties. The arts, of course, the languages, librarians, Bourdelot, the medical guy, for example, various Dutch polyhistors, Vossius, the younger, for example, and you would find also people representing, well, basically, my own favorite, of course, is Johannes Schaeferus, the man who then also brought knowledge and scholarship even further north and wrote a big book called Laponia, representing the far north, so bringing Southern Europe and Northern Europe together. These people also represented many nations, so in a sense she was hybrid there too. She was transnational, she didn't care about limits. Then she was also extremely capable. She managed her own, I mean, she didn't lead a simple life. She took the difficult road, and she tried to manage big affairs, and she, well, a few losses here and there, but basically she managed to do that as well. So I think we have here a personality carrying a number of capacities that are quite contemporary, quite modern, if you like. Her court became more or less a mosaic of European culture. And also by choosing religion and choosing to depart from a religion, I think she also, in a sense, speaks to the current very central problems of European identity with multiculturalism, multi-religion, multi-everything, and she represents a way of dealing with that. Leaving a faith and crossing over that transgression that the previous speaker so, I think, importantly stressed, and this whole idea of utopian space. Although I would say that perhaps the classic idea of the hero is also that you return to your own place, having been on the other side, so to speak, and bring that. She really never came home to Sweden. Although she was here, she was never received. And I think in a certain sense we have not yet received her. I think the moment of reception is still to be held. And in a certain sense perhaps this thought experiment is also, it's not just about testing Christina as a symbolic figure for Europe, it's also a testing of her final homecoming, when we could, so to speak, elevate her really to the European level and choose her if not as a queen, so at least as our modern Swedish European. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Sörlin. All right. That's for the three of them. Well, just one word to defend the possibility of Norwegian Europeans. After all, Ibsen wrote his best pieces in the Hofgarten in Munich. So, I mean, there is something, even Norwegians can be Europeans, although it's hard to see. Now, there was, I think, a very interesting point in, if I may, it will not be long, in Professor Sörlin's presentation, namely the idea of living in change and implying sort of more or less incarnating a life in change. I may be old-fashioned, I probably am, but I think if there's anything symbols should represent, it's endurance, its value, its perpetuity. And I think a symbol which is sort of characterized by its changing character seems to me a very risky operation. But this possibly corresponds to the present situation in Europe, but then it will not serve forever. It will probably be a new change after that. But you are perfectly right, of course, in saying that Christina, the very mutability, the very her lack of, in a way, of stability in some respects is obviously very still. But no, so just one more point. She did return to Sweden, but to negotiate about money, which I think, after all, is not a very dignified return. She got a very, very substantial income, as you know, from various provinces, and that wasn't enough, really, for the kind of life she led. And I think Queen should live on a rather glorious scale, but she overdid it a little, didn't she?
Well, may I come back here and say that, first of all, defend her again, really, and now against you, to say that she didn't get all that she deserved from the kind of arrangement that was made. I think, at least in my superficial learning about Christina, I think she only got about a third of what she had expected. So she was rightly returning to demand more. And of course, she had some expenditures for all her collections and lifestyle and all of that. Then I think another key word maybe of our time that I think is coming up from the sciences really and is spreading more and more and sometimes abused is the word resilience. In a certain sense, I think we not just want symbols, we also want resilient symbols. And resilience means really that you have capacity to change, to live, adapt to stresses outside. And I think that is also a capacity that she carries. She certainly was under stress many times and had big troubles, but she constantly survived. Again, the phoenix symbol comes up again as an interesting idea that not just if you stay with certain values, you are bound to succumb.
Thank you. Well, would any of the speakers, the first speakers, comment on the intervention of another of the speakers, or shall we Well, shall we ask the audience? Yes, please, sir.
My name is Per. Of course, being very interested in pictures and films, I wonder about the American movie with Rita Barbo acting as Queen Christina. Will that movie forever, will that very famous movie forever influence our picture and image of Rita Barbo? Of Queen Christina? Is that movie too glamorous? Or what's your opinion?
All right. Is any of you who is prepared to give an answer to that? Given the general level of education of the public, I'm sure it will have an influence. But
well, I would address the test and answer. I would say no. We can make a new movie, and that glorious image would fade. In fact, it was so many years since I saw it that I hardly remember anything. But there is this. I think there is this opportunity to renew a portrait, and there's already a long sequence of portraits. That, of course, is perhaps one of the most pervasive since it was Hollywood. But still, Hollywood can have a new chance, perhaps, or even Paris can.
more intervention? Yes, please.
Could I give you some support in your I would like to give all the representatives a big support in your work finding an emblem for Europe. The famous book of Robert Musil, Der Mann ohne Eigenschaften, because it's a kind of the best European novel so far, ironic and filled with ambiguity, and also about trying to find union in a split Europe, the split between Hungary and Austria. And he really, it's known to be hard to read, but I do really recommend it from the bottom of my heart. You can read nothing more about the work of a symposium, the work of finding an idea, and the impossibility and the ambiguity and being the first European, really. So have a good lecture, all of you, because you will never forget that book. I promise you, it's highly European. And you don't know about Musil?
About?
Robert Musil.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Do read it. As Horatio say, do read it during the night, do read it during the day, because he is highly important for all your aims. Have a good time.
Thank you. Yes.
So Ulrich could be the symbol for Europe. So thanks so much for all these interesting talks. But I had some ideas, but I think they all came up, my ideas, but maybe I want to put them a little bit further. First of all, I like the idea that identity building should be a process and should be an open process, because usually if we build a we also create the other, the outside. So I think it's very important to see symbolization not as an endpoint, but as a process. And it's always a contested process. So that's why I like the idea of hybridity, because Christina, of course, is a hybrid, or we construct her as a hybrid person, where you can have a lot of feelings, emotions, effects on her. But she's also contested. You could also, you didn't mention it, but I'm sure you will say, why a monarch as a symbol for a democratic Europe? Of course, I like that she seems to be a woman. She was a woman. She might be seen as a lesbian, as an intersex person. So there are a lot of identifications for people who do not that easily belong to the Europe. But I think I would like the idea of hybridity and contestation that might make her a symbol for Europe. So thanks for these ideas. The other thing is what I'm struggling with, and this was also mentioned on the podium, how can we think Europe not only in times of crisis, but as a project which is also not only a cultural project, but also an economic project. And I think we have to, if we talk about symbols, we have to look at the current situation in Europe. at the situation of a crisis. And if I look at, and this morning I just learned again, we know it that 20% of the people in Greece have no jobs. They can't go to hospitals, they don't get any medicaments. So how can we combine our idea of finding a symbol for Europe with this disastrous economic situation? So, yeah, maybe that's a question.
Thank you. Good impression. I saw more hands in the air. Yes, please, Madame.
We were talking about Greta Garbo and her adventures on the silver screen, and of course one of the interesting objects in that film is the replica of the silver throne. And of course, if you look at Queen Christina today in Stockholm, almost the only thing left of her in public view is the silver throne, and it will of course be very much valued in the future when we have a new queen sitting on the throne, hopefully. But I want to draw your attention to Queen Christina's own search for symbols. We have been talking about the phoenix bird, which I very much like myself. And it was used after the Monaldesco murder, when she was trying to come back to power, and she really saw herself as rising from the ashes, being burned down to the ground and then coming back. But she also has in her program an histoire métallique, several emblems that she wanted to use to illuminate her own life. And among them is a paradise bird, which is inscribed, "From you what I wanted," which is, of course, is another more content picture of her than the phoenix bird, which seems to be very troubled. And it's interesting that in the Piazza del Popolo, one has used the Vasa sheaf on its decoration, and she also herself used the Vasa sheaf of wheat, her ancestral symbol, as an emblem for herself, and you can see her books inscribed with this emblem. But apparently, this was not such a strong symbol in the end, because in Rome there are lots of weapons, weapon shields from all kinds of families, Italian families. So what she ended up with in her, in the big Lido Parade, and also earlier on the Via del Corso, is a big, huge crown. Apparently, she reverted to her role as queen, as using this crown symbol, a huge crown which was maybe 2 meters in diameters, was exposed on the Via del Corso, and also another one on her Lido de Parade. So you could say that a lot of what she did was seeking for a suitable symbol for herself. And in this sense, she herself is a kind of emblem seeker. So I just wanted to draw your attention to this. Thank you.
Thank you. I think there were 1 or 2 more hands raised. Aren't there? Well, should we ask our panel or the podium for comments to what has been said from the floor? Are there any ideas here that appeal particularly to you, or which you reject violently?
Thank you very much for this question about the economic situation in Europe. This is a disaster, as we know. I think, especially with my work about Christina, my research, and my idea about the phoenix as an emblem or a symbol for Europe, I know a symbol is always also a dangerous thing, because a symbol you can use in this way and in another way. Perhaps we are in need of a symbol for this phase in our history now, what we have to overcome. And we have also to split or to separate the European Union, the thought, and the euro crisis. These are 2 separate things. And for sure, for the euro, I also am dreaming about, they have the eagle dollar and we would have the phoenix euro, perhaps, that we hope so. And I think about all this crisis, what we have, and we have to deal now since for a couple of years and for sure for a long time. Perhaps we also could find the answer in a text which Christina created with Antoni Vera about the moral plague. And I think this is a suffering. We suffer at the moral plague today because we have the results of a development of a down development in the moral of all these things what happened in the last 5 or 10 years. I think we could find answers in her life. Reading this sermon about the moral plague would be very helpful for us. We have to find a new basis for our moral attitudes, for our moral values. And to come to a result, I keep with my picture about the phoenix.
Thank you. Professor Darroux?
Just a comment, a general comment. I think the main need in Europe today, the peoples are feel the lack of sense of signification. And the lack of signification produces, I think, a lack of legitimacy. Yeah, recognition, yeah. And I have studied many communities, many Indian communities in Brazil. The community that Lévi-Strauss visited in the year 1930, and I'm very fascinated by the power of mythology. In these communities, the whole world is intelligible. Everything has a signification. The word is understood completely by the mythology. And I ask myself about the lack of European mythology. Perhaps we need more than symbols, but we need a mythology which gives sense. The mythology gives sense to the past, but also to the present and the future. The time of mythology is unhistorical, and I hope, I imagine that Christina, more than a symbol, can constitute a myth, feeding the mythology we need now in Europe.
Thank you. Professor Sörlin, would you add something?
Yeah, well, just a couple of small remarks here. First of all, thanks for all the interesting remarks from the floor. And I would like to pick up on what was said here about her own use of the crown as a symbol or an emblem towards the end of her life. I'm certainly not a Christina scholar, so what I say here now cannot be interpreted in that way, but it just seems to me as also a symbol, not necessarily of being the regent or the reign of the queen, but also the symbol of that existential struggle, something that you actually have been in a deep relation to your whole life, and whether you should keep it or whether you should not keep it. So and I think that there has been some descriptions of this decoronation moment. And I think that is a pretty moving scene, isn't it? When she is lifting the crown from her head, and also how that is tied to the entire nation, if I may use that word. Of course, it was a kind of a proto-nation in a sense. Not every Swede was really so much Swedish, but those who were assembled must have been this moment of deep emotional change. What is going to happen? It was a trembling moment, and I think that is also a part of my understanding of her as showing great courage. But at the same time, you never know whether your next step that you take is the right one, and that's I think where we need to be resilient and flexible and choose our path forward. And I think it's a great idea to try and depict her. Maybe that's what the new Garbo film should be about. It should be about the mythology of Christina for Europe. A lot of potential here. I'm really full of expectations if that play that I talked about will ever be staged.
Thank you. I think we have reached a point. In fact, it's 12:30, and which, according to our program, is where we should stop. So I think we are most grateful to our speakers who've taken the trouble of developing their ideas here. And I think there is also every reason to be grateful to those in the audience who have participated. And let me resume that obviously there is a strong cause for Queen Christina, some sort of European symbol. I should possibly add the reservation that in this country, at least, which ought to be one of the countries where she is best known, I suppose a school child of 10 is not perfectly certain that that school child knows who she is. So that is a weakness in a symbol. That may be a strength, also a strength. I would personally vote for Charles Quint, but I realized he wouldn't be very popular. A symbol unknown to those supporting it is, after all, it's interesting. It may be. I'm afraid Christina is, at the present moment, possible is a symbol for intellectuals. But the hard question for Europe is who can symbolize what is common for the rest. And if we suppose everybody here present can be called or call herself or himself an intellectual, the others are in majority. And that has to be kept in mind when we're choosing symbols. Anyway, we have had a very interesting discussion. We are grateful also to Monsieur Viard and Madame Nistor and all those who have organized this. I think we leave the room a little more wiser than we were when entering it. Thank you.